So that takes us to our first discussion. Let's talk about the world that cryptocurrency people are trying to build. What are the different social, political, and economic aspirations of the cryptocurrency community? And why is money so central to those ambitions? We have a great slate of guests joining us for this discussion. Welcome to Garrick Hileman, head of research at blockchain.com, Ann Brody, who is doing a PhD at McGill University, and Thessy Mehraine, co-founder of Liquiality and director of global product and innovation at Consensus. Welcome all.
Thanks, June.
Garrick, you and I worked together at CoinDesk in the early days, many, many years ago, in the distant past of cryptocurrencies. And you used to talk about this idea that central banks would accumulate Bitcoin as a hedge. Can you just tell us, are we closer or further away from that world today?
I think we're closer. And, I know John, Paul Tudor Jones has been in the news recently with his investment. He made, I thought, an important point, which is that every day that Bitcoin, kind of continues to exist, it gets stronger, it becomes more credible. And so in some way, every passing day that, crypto is still here, Bitcoin is still here, there's a step closer to the day where it's a more widely held asset because it enhances its credibility, its perceived durability, and so on. And, there's, depending upon how you define a central bank, there's likely governments / central banks that today hold some crypto, some maybe not for as legitimate reasons. I mean, we believe that, for example, the North Korean government may be involved in hacking and may hold some crypto as part of that. There's speculation around Venezuela and other countries. But, there's various reasons why central banks might want to hold it. That's a much longer conversation we could go into. I think we're still, though, to be clear, though, a ways away from a, Federal Reserve or European Central Bank from holding Bitcoin. I think that day is still quite far into the future.
And just as a quick follow-up question there, does it matter how central banks come to hold cryptocurrencies? For example, we just had the halving, which obviously is a reduction in the mining subsidy for securing the Bitcoin network. And there have been rumors that, for example, North Korea is mining Bitcoin, right? So does it matter whether it's they're buying cryptocurrencies on the open market or they're mining cryptocurrencies themselves? Does that make a difference?
I think it absolutely does. The intention around why government or anyone owns a cryptocurrency is very important. Governments have owned cryptocurrency because they seize them through law enforcement operations. So more and more governments have become used to taking possession or managing, at least temporarily, the ownership of cryptocurrency. I think most governments tend to sell relatively quickly their cryptocurrencies. There's some discussion that maybe Bulgaria might hold a significant quantity of Bitcoin. That's I don't think entirely clear from what I know. But if you're mining it, if you're seizing it, if you're, as the researchers affiliated with the Barbados central bank suggested, buying it for investment purposes to actually boost the value of reserves. I mean, I think these different reasons are absolutely important to understanding kind of what happens with central bank or government ownership of crypto assets. Mining would be, I think, a pretty amazing step forward. I mean, that would, to me, signal that governments really saw this as a strategic, asset of importance and needed to have some kind of significant presence in the space beyond just wanting to invest or hedge for currency, forex reasons. That would be, I think, kind of, maybe the ultimate step in endorsement and legitimization of crypto assets.
I want to shift to a bit of a broader question here and ask you both about kind of the more utopian aspirations of the industry. And I mean, most people assume that sort of the industry's aspirations are by and large utopian. And as someone who works on Ethereum, Thessy, would you agree with that? Are you seeing a lot of sort of techno-utopian aspirations in that crowd?
Number one, I wouldn't say there is one industry. There's no agreement across the board that we all have the same goal, right? There's enterprise blockchain, which is looking to gain efficiency. So putting that aside and looking at what I consider the real blockchain, the public, for example, public Ethereum blockchain that is building out a trust layer, benefiting the applications that are built on top and allowing for secure transactions that way. Enabling, for example, supply chain tracking, which we have already in production. I actually worked on the first project that was going into production for supply chain, or self-sovereign identity, all these kind of models that we have started to build out. It's not utopian, it's already in existence. The question is it being used or should it be used at this point? But definitely we see the future at the horizon by building the foundations.
And as a follow-up to that, I mean, some people would look at, you know, sort of blockchain ideas about trust, how you're treating kind of everybody as a potential attacker or enemy. No one can be trusted as dystopian. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Sure. If you look at the internet, for example, right, it's very, historically we can compare that. The internet was the revolution in communication. And it brought us, the extension of communication to be able to globally interact and communicate. And it brought a lot of democracy towards information and information asynchronicity. But on the other hand, also it brought us data mining. It brought us loss of privacy. And if you look at the dystopian version of that for blockchain, that would mean, for example, all the things we do. I mean, usually the best is also very closely related to the worst, right? The goal is right next to the opposition. And so the dystopian aspect here would be that the other side of the solution is, in the solution is actually in the other hand, for example, right? So that your data is being tracked and not being forgotten ever, that mistakes follow you around forever, that reward systems reward legacy values, top-down powers, and that identities fail the individual. So the other side of blockchain can be the dystopian log engine solidifying inequalities as we have them already.
And we're now joined by Ann Brody here, who was earlier having a little bit of technical difficulty. Welcome, Ann.
Hi, thank you so much. Hi there. Sorry about that.
No worries. We're actually just talking about something that you study, which is sort of the assumption that there are some more kind of techno-utopian aspirations in the industry. But if I recall correctly, you disagree with this.
Yeah, of course, it also depends on the cryptocurrency or blockchain community that you're looking at. But my research specifically deals with Ethereum. And based on just my observations of and participant observation with the Ethereum community, I find that the developers themselves, they're not necessarily techno-utopian, but because blockchain cultures, it's still a hacker culture, and a hacker culture is predicated on this like engineering ethos that is very committed to this excellency in their work. And I think that in terms of their future outlook for blockchain and their visions for it, I think there's a very pragmatic outlook on it, and they're very aware of the challenges that face them. Based on just like talking to them, they were really they're very adamant on expressing that blockchain is nowhere near where it's supposed to be, that there's so many issues that are still need to be fixed and still need to be thought out better, and that the community itself is not perfect. I mean, there's like a lot of these themes of diversity that keep coming up, which is very different from the Bitcoin community, which I found places less emphasis on themes related to diversity and equity and equality.
You know, this reminds me of the Ursula Le Guin quote. She wrote, you know, every utopia contains a dystopia, and every dystopia contains a utopia. Just to turn back to Garrick here, and playing off sort of Ann's findings, you know, what kind of a world is it if we're living in a world where you know, governments, treasuries, or central banks are accumulating, for example, Bitcoin as a chaos hedge, right? Even Paul Tudor Jones's sort of investment logic is that because fiat currency is becoming so sort of debased, that's why we want to buy. He wants to buy Bitcoin. So are we actually headed towards this dystopian world now, where cryptocurrencies become, you know, the thing that we hold and the way that we transact?
Yeah, it's a great question, June. And you know, one of my great fears, and it's, you know, not just me, you know, regulators have identified one of the key risks around the existence of crypto assets is that hedge funds, large ones like Paul Tudor Jones, get overinvested and overexposed and fuel, you know, a big bubble that crashes and create systemic risk for the financial system. Hedge funds are plugged into banks. Banks are systemically important. You know, you could see in an environment like we have today with, you know, limited maybe financial investment opportunities, some would argue, crypto being quite attractive and being a victim of its own success potentially, where there's a manic, you know, rise into a level that is deemed material from a systemic risk perspective, like $1 trillion plus asset class, and you know, crypto exacerbating the next great crisis in some ways, because there is this kind of exit ramp, you know, that you know, hedge funds and others can flee into. I very much worry about that. And to your point, I think I think, you know, a transition to a more blockchain, decentralized, cryptocurrency-centric financial system has to occur steadily over time if it is, you know, the right thing to occur. I mean, I think that's still a question that we're all kind of wrapping our heads around and you know, groping to understand better. You know, what is this new world we're heading towards? Is it better than the one we live in now? You know, there's still a lot of data that we just don't have around ownership concentration levels across crypto assets. You know, they, from a Gini coefficient perspective, some of them can be very tightly owned, you know, and that raises a lot of important social, economic equality questions and so on and so forth. So there's lots of really, I think, important questions here to understand around, you know, kind of the community that's owning crypto assets. You know, are we seeing dispersion, more and more people owning? There is data that in Bitcoin's case suggests that's true, that it's becoming less and less concentrated. I think that's actually very healthy, very important even to its success and existence.
And just briefly here, clock's winding down a little bit, guys, but I'm quite curious to hear your thoughts on sort of more equality-related issues. And Thessy, I want to ask you first, because you're the co-founder of Liquiality, which is a peer-to-peer exchange, and you started the Women in Blockchain community, as well as you were part of the Occupy Wall Street movement. And you've argued that decentralization has the potential to create more equality. And do you think the industry has lived up to this potential so far?
Yes, in many ways. Blockchain can provide the trust layer needed for decentralization to move agency from the institutions to the individuals, right? And for example, Bitcoin, which was the first application on the blockchain, is an alternative to money. It's decentralized, it's censorship resistant, and it's transparent, and it's peer-to-peer. No bank needed. So that alone is revolutionary. And, you know, in the early Bitcoin days, lots of nerds got rich. And so also a lot of, inequality was resolved that way. The money moved to different groups. That's, of course, a very idealistic view of that because there is concentration of wealth, as Garrick already mentioned. Now, looking at the Ethereum community, for example, Ethereum community is building circular economies. It's building DAOs, decentralized autonomous organizations that allow quickly to start organizations and come together and fund towards a common goal, and builds in general applications that take advantage of that trust layer that blockchain provides. There are about 1.7 billion people unbanked today, and I would like to see all of these people being able to be part of the economy, not necessarily by being banked, right? So we built that alternative to that, and that will create, greater equality because it will help the individual. For example, people can access decentralized finance products like atomic loans or compound. And then, for example, Liquiality, as you mentioned, my project bridges Bitcoin and Ethereum blockchains and allows unintermediated permissionless exchange, peer-to-peer. So peer-to-peer is a really big factor here. And so, yes, we are working on the infrastructure and the protocols to enable this unintermediated access and interoperability between the systems and between the ecosystems and blockchains and between the communities. But I only talked about the applications. There are also so many other initiatives in this space, which are also part of, reaching equality. There are global hackathons, for example. There was a Blockchain for Social Impact Coalition incubator recently. So where teams globally come together and work, on solutions. In this case, it was about environment, right? So there are the social factors, there are the technology factors. And does that resolve racism or discrimination? No. I mean, of course, the society is still also reflected in technology, and it's a male-dominated field, a white male-dominated field. Will that have to change? Yes. Will that be something that can be mediated by technology and help, balance? Yes. So there is this shift back and forth between education and, building technology and adoption that we have to watch out for. And no, it's not perfect at all, but we are on the way.
Thessy, thanks for that comment. And thank you to all our guests, Garrick and Thessy, for joining us on this show.